I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. Setting up a new phone for someone should be a mundane task, simple, routine. Yet as I sat at the kitchen counter with my wife's brand new phone in hand, my entire world was about to collapse in the most unimaginable way. "Hey, babe," Sarah had said earlier that afternoon, tossing her old phone on the counter. "Can you transfer everything over to the new one? You know I'm useless with tech." I smiled, as I always did, trying not to show the small pang of annoyance. Of course, I'd handle it. I'd always been the go-to guy for everything, from fixing a leaky faucet to setting up electronics. But this should have been easy. As I began syncing the data, the usual flood of files, contacts, and apps flowed across the screen. Nothing strange at first. Just the everyday clutter of messages, calendar events, and photos. It wasn't until I reached the recently deleted folder that a strange thought crossed my mind. Should I restore these files? Normally, I wouldn't have, but something nagged at me. It wasn't curiosity at first, just a practical thought. Maybe she'd need something here. So, I restored the photos. The images loaded, one by one, filling the screen with a mosaic of memories. But what I saw next would change everything. At first, I didn't register the faces. I didn't want to. My brain was trying to reject what I was seeing, like it couldn't comprehend the betrayal forming before my eyes. Sarah, my Sarah, was there, half naked, bound to a chair. Her wrists tied behind her back with a familiar red scarf I'd seen in our house many times, laughing with an open mouth, a laugh I'd once loved. But it wasn't her joy that shattered me. It was him. I blinked, my hand trembling as I scrolled through the sequence of photos. There was no mistaking the other man in the pictures, our mutual acquaintance, Mark. He was someone who'd been at our dinners, our parties. I had welcomed him into our home, shared beers, stories, laughter. And now, I was staring at images of him, pleasuring my wife. A cold sweat broke out over my skin as each image grew more graphic, more intimate. In every photo, he was there, taking her in ways that I had never imagined, never thought possible. Her body, once mine, was his. She was tied up, submissive, and from the look on her face, she was enjoying every second. I gripped the edge of the counter, feeling the sharp edge of rage cut through the disbelief. My mouth was dry, my heart pounded in my chest like a war drum, and the only sound I could hear was the blood rushing through my ears. I slammed the phone down, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to process it all. How long had this been going on? Why had this been going on? Questions swirled in my head, but none of them mattered now. All I could feel was betrayal, deep and raw, stabbing into me like a knife. The front door opened, and I heard Sarah's voice, cheerful and light. "Hey, love, what do you want for dinner?" Her tone was sweet, innocent. The perfect wife. But that facade had been torn away, and now all I could see was the woman in those pictures. I turned to face her, my hands gripping the phone so tightly I thought I might break it. My voice came out rough, barely controlled. "Sarah." She looked up, pausing when she saw the look on my face. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" I wanted to scream, to throw the phone at her and demand answers. But instead, I just held it up, showing her the screen. I didn't say a word. Her face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks as her eyes darted to the phone and back to me. There was no denying what she saw. The guilt was written all over her. "Tom. I can explain," she stammered, taking a step back. "Explain?" I repeated, my voice cold. "What's there to explain, Sarah? You and Mark, our friend, you've been doing this behind my back. How long?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The panic in her eyes was growing, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook. Not this time. The trust, the bond we'd built over years of marriage had been shattered in an instant, and all I felt now was the growing, pulsing anger inside me. "How long, Sarah?" I demanded, stepping forward. Her hands trembled as she backed away, tears welling in her eyes. It just happened. Just happened. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Don't lie to me. You don't just happen to end up tied to a chair while our so-called friend does that." I slammed the phone down on the counter, sending a jarring echo through the kitchen. She flinched, but I didn't care. There was no going back from this. "I trusted you," I said, my voice low but filled with venom. "I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me." The room was thick with tension, the air almost suffocating. I could feel the weight of my rage pressing down on me, begging to be unleashed. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not yet. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I never meant to hurt you." "Hurt me?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "You destroyed me, Sarah. You destroyed us." She took a step closer, her hand reaching out for mine, but I recoiled. I didn't want her touch, not now, not ever again. This woman standing before me was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. I could feel it brewing inside me, a need to make her pay for what she'd done. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. No, this betrayal wouldn't go unanswered. "We're done," I said, my voice steady now. "Pack your things and get out." Her eyes widened in shock, her tears coming faster now. "Tom, please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I cut her off. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." And with that, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there in silence. My mind was already racing ahead, plotting my revenge. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But one thing was clear, Sarah had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. The house felt heavier without Sarah. Her footsteps were no longer in the hall, no soft humming from the kitchen, no scent of her perfume drifting through the living room. Yet, instead of peace, all I could feel was a churning storm inside me. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the humiliation, the endless parade of questions in my mind. How long had she been playing me for a fool? And more importantly, how had I missed it? I had sent her packing that night. She begged, cried, pleaded. But the door had closed on her, and on everything we once had. I couldn't stomach another word from her. Now, in the silence of our house, or my house, rather, rage was festering, mutating into something darker. I needed to do more than just cut her off. There had to be consequences for what she and Mark had done to me. There was no way I could let this go so easily. Mark. The thought of him made my blood boil. I had considered him a friend, someone I could trust. He and his wife, Karen, had been at our wedding, had come over for barbecues, laughed with us over drinks. That bastard. I thought about him every time I pictured those photos, the way he had touched Sarah, the way she had responded to him. They had humiliated me. And that humiliation deserved retribution. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I hadn't been expecting anyone, and for a split second, I wondered if Sarah had come crawling back again. I squared my shoulders, ready for another confrontation, but as I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was Karen, Mark's wife. Her face was pale, her expression tense, and her eyes red, as if she'd been crying. "Tom," her voice cracked as she spoke. "Can we talk?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should let her in. But something in her gaze, maybe the shared pain of betrayal, pushed me to open the door wider. "Yeah. Come in." She stepped inside, her hands shaking as she rubbed them together nervously. I led her to the kitchen, where the remnants of the phone debacle still lay scattered on the counter. She glanced at the phone but didn't ask any questions. Instead, she sat down at the table, her eyes downcast. "I know," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know what?" I asked, though I could already sense what was coming. "I know about Mark and Sarah." Her voice was trembling, but she pushed through it. "I found out 2 days ago." I sat down across from her, the weight of the situation sinking in. We were both victims of their betrayal, both blindsided by the people we had trusted the most. "How long?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "A year." Karen's eyes filled with fresh tears as she stared at the table, unable to meet my gaze. "It's been going on for a year." "A year." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. All this time, they had been lying to us, pretending like nothing was wrong while sneaking around behind our backs. The anger inside me flared, burning hotter with each passing second. "I can't believe I didn't see it," I muttered, shaking my head. "How could they do this to us?" Karen wiped at her tears, sniffling. "I don't know, Tom. I don't know how they could be so heartless." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us stewing in our misery. But then, an idea began to form in my mind, dark, twisted, but somehow satisfying. I couldn't just let them get away with this. Not after everything they'd done. And now, with Karen sitting here in front of me, I realized I didn't have to do it alone. "I want to make them pay," I said suddenly, my voice sharp with resolve. "They've torn apart both of our lives. They deserve to feel the same pain they've caused us." Karen looked up, surprised by the harshness in my tone. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they've been screwing us over, literally and figuratively. I'm not just going to sit back and let them laugh about it while we're left picking up the pieces." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. "I want to ruin them, Karen. Both of them." Her expression shifted from sadness to something darker, something that mirrored my own rage. "What are you thinking?" I leaned back in my chair, the gears in my mind turning. "We can hit them where it hurts. We know their secrets, their lies. Let's expose them. Let the world see who they really are. Destroy their reputations, their friendships, everything." Karen's eyes widened, but there was no hesitation in her response. "You're right. They deserve that." She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening into fists. "I've been going over it in my head, trying to figure out what to do. But, yeah. Let's do it. Let's take them down." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something other than rage, purpose. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. They had betrayed us, humiliated us, and now they would pay the price. "What's the plan?" Karen asked, her voice steadier now. "We start with Mark," I said, my mind already racing with ideas. "He has a big project at work coming up, doesn't he?" She nodded. "Yeah, something with his boss, a huge promotion on the line." "Perfect." I grinned, a dark satisfaction bubbling up inside me. "We'll make sure his boss finds out exactly what kind of man he is. And Sarah, she's been angling for that new position at the hospital, right? Let's make sure the board knows all about her extracurricular activities." Karen smiled, a cold, determined look in her eyes. "I like where this is going." There was no turning back now. The seeds of revenge had been planted, and soon they would grow into something far more destructive than either of them could have imagined. But this wasn't just about destroying their careers. That was just the beginning. I wanted to dismantle their lives, piece by piece, until they had nothing left. No friends, no respect, no love. Just the hollow emptiness that they had left me with. I stood up, feeling a surge of energy course through me. "Let's get to work." Karen followed suit, her face set with grim determination. We both had been broken by them, but now, we were going to become the wrecking ball that would tear their lives apart. I glanced at the phone on the counter one last time, the images burned into my memory. This was where it started, but it was far from where it would end. The game had begun, and neither Mark nor Sarah had any idea of the storm that was coming for them. The next few days were a blur of plotting, planning, and digging up dirt. Karen and I became partners in this twisted mission, bound by our mutual betrayal and a shared thirst for vengeance. As each day passed, the knot of anger inside me tightened, but so did the clarity of what we needed to do. We were careful. We couldn't afford to tip them off. If they sensed anything, they'd be able to clean up their messes, and we couldn't allow that. So, we played it cool. I kept to my routine, showed up to work like nothing had happened, and even went for a drink with a few of the guys to keep up appearances. But beneath the surface, every interaction, every fake smile, was part of a larger plan. Tonight, though, was when everything would really start to fall into place. Karen had tipped me off earlier that day. Mark's having drinks with his boss after work. It's supposed to be a big moment for him to secure the promotion. Perfect, I had said, already feeling the gears turning. This was our opportunity to throw a wrench into his plans. It was around 7 p.m. when I arrived at the upscale bar where Mark's little meeting was happening. I had dressed for the occasion, a smart suit and tie, the kind of look that said I was there for business, just like the rest of the patrons. I slipped inside, scanning the room for Mark. There he was, sitting in one of the booths with his boss, a sleek-looking guy in his mid-50s who oozed corporate arrogance. Mark was all smiles, his drink raised in some kind of celebratory toast. He was putting on the charm, no doubt trying to win his boss over. I felt the bile rise in my throat. That same charm had been used on my wife, and now he was flaunting it for a raise. I took a seat at the bar, far enough away that I wouldn't be noticed but with a perfect view of their table. Karen had given me some crucial details earlier. Mark's boss was the kind of man who prided himself on professionalism and family values. If he found out about Mark's extracurricular activities with my wife, it would be the end of his career. All I had to do was make sure that happened. Karen had managed to get her hands on Mark's phone records. It turned out he hadn't been very careful about covering his tracks. There were dozens of text messages and calls between him and Sarah, explicit photos that left nothing to the imagination. All I needed was the right moment to drop that bomb. My phone buzzed with a message from Karen. "Karen, I'm here. Back booth. You ready?" I glanced toward the back of the bar, where she sat with her own drink, blending into the background just like I was. We had worked out the plan meticulously. Tonight was about planting the seed, letting Mark feel the first tremors of his crumbling world. He had no idea that he was sitting on a time bomb. I texted her back. Let's do this." I motioned for the bartender to refill my glass, making it seem like I was just another guy enjoying an after-work drink. Then I watched, waiting for the perfect opening. Mark leaned forward, laughing at something his boss had said. His body language was relaxed, confident, too confident. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Karen made the first move. She slipped past their table, her head down, but her presence was enough to make Mark glance up. His eyes followed her for a second, his brow furrowing in confusion. She was supposed to be at home. Why would she be here? I watched him shift uncomfortably in his seat, glancing back at his boss, who hadn't noticed anything yet. I took my cue. Rising from my stool, I approached their table, making it look casual. As I passed by, I accidentally knocked over my drink, spilling it all over Mark's phone, which sat on the table. "Oh, shit!" I exclaimed, pulling out a napkin and pretending to frantically dab at the mess. "I'm so sorry, man. Let me help you clean that up." Mark jumped back, looking more irritated than surprised, but he waved it off, trying to play it cool in front of his boss. "Don't worry about it. It's fine." But I knew better. His phone was soaked, and as I made a show of trying to help, I subtly wiped my fingers across the screen. It came to life for just a moment, just enough for me to see his lock screen image, a picture of Sarah, dressed in lingerie, smiling at the camera. My stomach churned, but I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced a smile. Man, these new phones are pretty waterproof, right? You should be good. Mark gave me a tight-lipped smile. Yeah, sure. His boss was oblivious to the tension, chuckling about how technology was so advanced these days. But I could see it in Mark's eyes, he was rattled. He didn't like seeing me here, especially not when Karen was lurking around too. I stepped away, making my way back to the bar where Karen was watching closely. As I passed her, I nodded slightly. Phase 1, complete. Now came the fun part. Karen was going to finish what I'd started. With her in place, I exited the bar, knowing that in a matter of minutes, Mark's night was about to take a sharp turn. Outside, I leaned against the wall, pulling out my phone. Karen's message appeared almost instantly. Karen, he looks nervous. You think he suspects anything? Me, not yet. Just keep going. We've got him on edge. Now for the knockout punch. I had an anonymous email drafted, ready to send. Attached were the explicit texts and photos Mark had exchanged with Sarah. All it needed was a recipient, and I knew exactly where to send it, to his boss. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the send button for a second before I pressed it. There was no going back now. A few minutes later, I saw Karen slip out of the bar. She walked up to me, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. It's done. I nodded. And I overheard them. His boss got the email right as I was leaving. He was livid. He didn't say anything to Mark yet, but you could see it on his face. Mark's in trouble. Good, I said, the satisfaction of our first strike settling in. That's only the beginning. Karen smiled, a small, dark smile that mirrored my own. What's next? Next, we make sure Sarah's career takes the same nosedive. We'll hit her hard, just like we did Mark. We stood there for a moment, basking in the first taste of revenge. It wasn't enough yet, there was still so much more to come. But for now, we had struck the first blow, and it felt damn good. Mark and Sarah had no idea what was coming for them. This was only the beginning of their downfall, and I was going to make sure they felt every inch of the pain they had caused me. The thrill of revenge hadn't faded, not even a little. In fact, as the days passed, it grew stronger, feeding off every uneasy glance from Mark and Sarah, every suspicious text I saw Mark send to Karen, and every nervous conversation between Sarah and her friends. They knew something was wrong, but they had no idea just how deep the knife was going to cut. Tonight would be the final act. Karen and I had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, pulling strings and setting traps. Mark's boss had called him in for a closed-door meeting the day after I sent the email. Karen had told me Mark came home that evening looking like a broken man, confused and unsure what had gone wrong but too scared to confront his boss directly. Sarah, on the other hand, was completely oblivious to the walls closing in around her. She was still angling for that promotion at the hospital, blissfully unaware that her dirty secret was about to be splashed across every social circle she had spent years building. Tonight, everything would fall apart for them. Karen and I had agreed to stage a confrontation, a public, brutal confrontation that would expose both of them for who they really were. We knew Mark and Sarah were meeting for a secret dinner at a restaurant on the outskirts of town. It was a place they thought no one would notice them, a place where they could carry on their affair without fear of being discovered. But this time, we would be waiting for them. As I drove to the restaurant, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The anger was simmering just beneath the surface, but it was more controlled now, focused. I had a plan, and tonight, I was going to see it through to the bitter end. Karen was already there when I arrived, sitting in the parking lot in her car, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her phone screen. She looked up as I parked beside her and gave me a nod. "You ready for this?" I asked, my voice low. She smirked, a dark, dangerous glint in her eyes. "More than ready." I checked the time, 8:45 p.m. Mark and Sarah were inside, probably laughing over wine, thinking they were safe. I motioned for Karen to follow me, and together we walked into the restaurant. The place was quiet, dimly lit, with an intimate atmosphere that felt suffocating. My eyes scanned the tables until I spotted them in a corner booth, seated across from each other, their heads close together. Sarah was smiling, laughing, her hand casually brushing against Mark's. Rage boiled inside me, but I forced it down, channeling it into the icy calm that had become second nature. Karen and I approached their table, and it wasn't until we were just a few feet away that they noticed us. Sarah's laughter froze, her face draining of color when she saw me standing there. Mark looked just as shocked, his hand slipping from the table as if he'd been caught red-handed. "Tom." Sarah started, her voice faltering. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned to Mark, my eyes boring into him. "Enjoying your night, Mark? Out with the wife of your best friend? How's that taste, you piece of shit?" Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent, all eyes now fixed on us. I wasn't giving him a chance to escape this time. Sarah stammered, her voice high-pitched with panic. "Tom, please, let's not do this here. We can talk." "Talk?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "You think there's anything left to talk about, Sarah? You and Mark have been fucking behind my back for a year, and you want to talk?" Her face flushed with shame, and she glanced around, as if hoping to find an escape route. But there was none. "I've seen the photos," I said, my voice cold and steady. "All of them. Every disgusting one. You couldn't even delete them properly, could you?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity. No remorse. Nothing but the need to see this through. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes flicking toward Karen, who was standing silently beside me, her arms crossed. "Look, man, I don't know what you think you." "Shut the hell up, Mark," I snapped, cutting him off. "You don't get to talk. You think I don't know about you too? You think you can just smile and get away with it? You're done. Both of you." I tossed a manila envelope onto the table, the contents spilling out for all to see, printouts of their text messages, the explicit photos, everything. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the realization hit her. There was no hiding anymore. "This," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained rage, "is going to your boss, Mark. To Karen's family. To every mutual friend we have. Your lives are over." Mark paled, his eyes wide with panic. "Tom, wait, please, you don't understand." "No," I hissed. "You don't understand. You destroyed everything. Now, it's your turn." I stepped closer, leaning down so only he and Sarah could hear me. "You should know, Mark. You're about to lose everything. That promotion. Gone. Sarah's reputation. Shattered." Sarah reached out, her hand brushing against my arm, tears streaming down her face. "Tom, I'm sorry, I never meant for this to happen, I swear." I jerked my arm away from her. "You meant every single thing you did, Sarah. Every lie. Every betrayal. You meant all of it." Karen finally spoke up, her voice cold and cutting. "You've ruined us, Mark. Now, it's your turn to watch everything fall apart." For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. The weight of everything we had said settled over them like a dark cloud. They knew there was no coming back from this. Then, Mark snapped. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't do this. His voice was high with desperation. You have no idea what you're doing. I smiled, a cruel, satisfied smile. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. Before he could say another word, I turned and walked out, Karen following closely behind. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I could hear Sarah's sobs echoing behind me, but I didn't care. They were nothing to me now. We got into our cars, the silence between us speaking louder than any words. We had done what we set out to do. Mark and Sarah's lives were in ruins, just like ours had been. But instead of feeling the satisfaction I had expected, there was only emptiness, a void where the anger had once been. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a message. I glanced at it, and my heart stopped. Karen, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry, Tom. A split second later, I heard the crash. Karen's car had swerved off the road, slamming into the tree at the edge of the lot. By the time I reached her, it was too late. She was gone. The price of revenge had been paid in full.